Okay, so good to see everybody. Hope everyone is doing well, staying safe, um, and yeah, getting ready for Pesach. Exciting stuff. We're actually doing virtual school now with my kids because there was an outbreak, which means one person had it at the school, had a COVID at the school. So when the less stressful thing in your life is Pesach cleaning, that's less stressful than everything else. Uh, that says something. So we can and now we can I can stop thinking about virtual school and start thinking about something more relaxing like Pesach cleaning. Okay, just before we get into the actual laws, just to give a brief summary, and some of this I've discussed in the past in Shul or in other classes, but we'll give a brief summary of some things we've discussed in the past, and then we'll get into some of the major laws. So, Pesach cleaning could sometimes be a stress for people, especially tends to be a little more stress on women than men. But us men, we have a responsibility as best as we could to try to help our wives or mothers uh, or spouses. Um, and as I'd like to discuss, perhaps Pesach cleaning does not have to be as stressful as people make it out to be. People tend to use Pesach cleaning as a time to do their spring cleaning, which is okay. It's perfectly okay. But we do have to differentiate between Pesach cleaning and spring cleaning, right? Spring cleaning is when you tidy things up, is when you throw all the old junk that you have, unless you're throwing out bread, unless you're throwing out old cookies. So you're throwing out old clothes. You're welcome to do that, but that is not Pesach cleaning. Um, and when we're looking at the house, when we're trying to decide how we're going to clean our house, so it really comes down to two areas. Really comes down to two zones, so to speak. What are the two zones? The two zones that it comes down to, one is the food zones, which we'll call for the kitchen and the dining room, where you actually have food, and then there's the rest of the house. Okay, so there's the areas where you're actually going to have food, and then there's the rest of the house. The rest of the house is going to be the easier place to clean, and therefore we will talk about that first. By the way, if anyone has any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or to stop me and ask. I want everyone to have an opportunity to ask their questions, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all of them. Okay, so when we're dealing with any area where you're not eating, when we're dealing with any area besides, let's say, the kitchen and the dining room, the important thing that we're looking to get rid of is not necessarily every crumb. And the reason for that is as follows. Before Pesach, we do something which is called in Hebrew bittul. And what that means is that before Pesach, we make a declaration and we say all the chametz in our possession, all the chametz that we own is all nullified, right? It's all ownerless. We don't want it anymore. It's not ours anymore. The prohibition on Pesach is owning the chametz or eating the chametz. And the reason we have to get it out of our houses is because we're not allowed to own it. So we do make this statement on Erev Pesach, on right before Pesach, and we say all our chametz is ownerless. Now, once we're going to make that statement, so why do we need to get rid of all our chametz? Just leave it in the house, leave all our chametz, leave all our bread and our cookies in the house, and just say it's not ours anymore. The problem with that is that if you leave all your chametz in your house, if you leave all your bread, your cookies, your cake in your house, then you might accidentally go into the cabinet and you might accidentally eat it. Because chametz is something that we're used to eating the entire year. So if you don't get rid of it from your house, if you don't physically separate from yourself, you might come to eat it. And that's what we're doing when we're Pesach cleaning. We're physically removing ourselves. We're physically removing the chametz so we don't come to eat it. If that's true, so when we're cleaning our house for chametz, why are we cleaning our house for chametz? Why are we looking in our bedroom drawer for chametz? We're looking in our bedroom drawer for chametz because, well, maybe there was that, cookie or that donut which we took as a midnight stack. We stuck it in the drawer. We left it there. And now on Pesach, we might pull it out individually wrapped, so therefore it's still fresh. And we might come to actually eat it on Pesach, especially if you have kids. Kids tend to eat anything that they find, and therefore the real concern in the rest of the house is not maybe there's a crumb on the floor, because you're not going to eat that crumb. You've already declared that crumb is not yours. It's ownerless, and therefore the major concern that we have with the rest of the house is really, is there going to be chametz that I'm going to find that I might come to eat? So therefore, that's really the level of cleaning that you need to do. So you need to go from room to room, as long as your bedroom is generally clean, as long as your living room is generally clean. So that's the idea. The idea is to go from room to room and see, maybe you left some chametz in your drawer, maybe you left some chametz in your cabinets, on your table, on your nightstand, anywhere in the house. You're looking to see, maybe I left chametz there, and therefore you need to get rid of it. People have all sorts of things that they do before Pesach. They wash the carpets in their house, and someone told me when he was a kid, his mother used to give him a toothbrush and used to make him scrub the baseboards of the whole house. It's not, again, if a person wants to do that, not a problem at all, but it's not something that we're required to do. When we're looking at all the areas of our house, that's what we're looking for. Even crumbs is not really a problem because you're not going to eat them. Even crumbs is not a problem. All we're looking for is that I leave that, I got maybe I got some cookies for Shalach Manos and I hid them away in my dresser drawer. That's really what we're looking for. The perhaps the one exception to that, the one other room that could be a little bit complicated, is the bathroom, and that's when it comes to cosmetics and things like that. So there's different opinions about what exactly the concern there is, and how much do we have to be concerned about cosmetics. Are medicines food, or are they not food, especially when you have things like deodorant and soap and things like that. So without getting into all the details now, there are opinions that say actually you have to make sure that it doesn't have chametz in them, that it doesn't have, usually the problem there would be some kind of alcohol, which is grain based. However, many opinions, and this is what I would suggest to do, many opinions make the following argument. And they say that when something is not edible, it's not considered chametz. When something is not edible, so soap and shampoo and deodorant, and all those things, since they're not edible, so chametz has to be edible, it has to be food, and these things are not edible, and therefore they're not chametz. The one exception would be if you have things that you're actually putting into your mouth. So, for example, if you have toothpaste or mouthwash, there are opinions that say it's not really food, but since you're actually putting it into your mouth, there I would suggest to make sure that your toothpaste and your mouthwash is kosher for Pesach. Most of the major brands are Listerine and Scope, Crest. Most of them are. If you have a question about which specific ones are a problem, I would be, or which ones are okay, I'd be happy to answer that if you let me know what you have. And because your toothpaste is something, and your toothbrush is something you put into your mouth perhaps after you've eaten cookies, so makes sense to get a new toothbrush, a new toothpaste. Anyways, I think you're supposed to replace your toothbrush every 2 months. Good time to do it. So therefore, replace your toothbrush, get a new toothpaste, a new mouthwash, and new lipstick, because that also goes on your mouth for those people who wear lipstick, and then that's all okay. Okay, that's all the areas in your house where you don't necessarily plan on eating over Pesach. Same thing would be with your car or your garage. Again, what you're looking for there is not necessarily crumbs. What you're looking for there is, did I leave that chocolate bar or that wafer or that candy, which contains chametz, which contains grains in it? Did I leave that in my car or in my garage? One approach that a person could always take is a person could say, you know what, I'm not going to use this area on Pesach. And one of the things we do before Pesach, I suggest everybody do, is that in case you have any chametz that you don't want to get rid of, that you don't want to destroy, so one thing you do is you can sell it. You could sell it to a non-Jew. It's a complicated process. Therefore, I don't suggest you do it on your own. but I'll be emailing out a form that you could fill out. It's a simple form, and therefore any chametz that you have, you could just sell it to the non-Jew. You won't touch it on Pesach, and then after Pesach, you'll go back and I'll buy it back from the non-Jew, and then it'll be yours again. So if you have an area, let's say the garage, you're not going to use the garage over Pesach. If you don't want to look for chametz there, what you could do is you can lock it off. You could say, I'm not going to go into that area, and then sell. You go ahead and sell the entire area. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, great. That's all the areas where we don't generally eat. Okay, then we go to the eating areas, and the reason why the eating areas are different, which for now we'll call the basically that means the kitchen and the dining room, or if you have a dinette, a place where you eat, those are going to be different. And the reason why they're different is because when one of the rules of chametz is that even if you have the tiniest bit of chametz, if you have 1 crumb of chametz that falls into your food, you won't be able to eat the entire food. Normally, again, complicated laws. We're not going to get into all the details, but normally when the rules of kosher are that if I have a tiny bit of non-kosher food that accidentally falls into my kosher food, and it all gets mixed up, it's no longer separable. I can't separate it out. So we say that if it's a minute amount, the ratio has to be 1 to 60. As long as it's less than 1 to 60, the food remains kosher. On Pesach, that's not true. On Pesach, if I have 1 crumb of chametz falls into my big pot of chicken soup, the entire pot of chicken soup will become prohibited. You can't eat any of it. And therefore, when we're dealing with the areas where we're actually going to eat, there we want to make sure to really, really purge it of any chametz. We want to make sure to get rid of any possible crumbs that could possibly be there. So there's not even 1 crumb that could possibly fall into our food. So therefore, when it comes to the dining room, the place where you're going to eat, therefore there it's more important. We're not just getting rid of big pieces of chametz. There you have to get rid of even crumbs. Therefore, when it comes to your dining room, it's important to obviously sweep the floor and mop the floor very well. But on top of that, to also make sure that the sometimes food can get stuck on the chairs or on the tables, to make sure that the chairs and the tables are clean. Depending on, again, when you have little kids at home, tends to be that your table and chairs get more dirty. If you're more of an adult house, then they tend not to get as dirty. But you should make sure that your tables and chairs are very clean, because again, even if you just have a little bit of crumbs that got stuck to the table, that's going to fall into your food. So that would make your food now prohibited. You would not be allowed to eat that food. So therefore, that room, it's important to be a little more meticulous to make sure everything is completely clean, completely wiped down, not even dirty with chametz residue or food residue, to make sure it's completely clean. Because when it comes to Pesach, we want to be extra strict. In general, we can take a more laid back approach, but there are certain stringencies. We do take chametz to Pesach a little more seriously than the rest of the year, and therefore we usually, the custom is we go 1 step farther, and not only do we make sure to clean the table, but we actually cover the table as well. So therefore, it's recommended to in some way cover the table. How do you cover the table? Everybody has their own method. You can really cover it with anything you want. When I was growing up, we used to do 2 layers, which is the custom. That's what recommended. So we would always do 1 layer of newspapers, and then we would take shelving paper and cover it on top, and then we'd tape everything down, and then we'd eat either on top of that or on top of a tablecloth on top of that. When I got married, my wife's family did it differently, so we do it the way she does it now, and that's that very simple. That we take a disposable plastic tablecloth, we take 2 of them, we spread it over the table, we tape it down, and now the table is completely covered. And therefore, even if we missed some chametz residue from the table, since it's completely covered, so now we have no problems. And again, like I said, it's important to really go through that room as well as possible. Just a a humorous story that I read in one of these Pesach books, that there was a family, they're sitting at the Seder, and the father who's leading the Seder is getting all excited about the Seder, and he's waving and he's banging on the table. He's so excited. He's saying over whatever things, whatever songs. He's banging on the table as he's singing the songs, and then all of a sudden they hear a plop under the table, and they look down, and there's a slice of bread with peanut butter on it. And what had happened is one of the kids in the week leading up to Pesach, after they had cleaned the table, he took his slice of bread with peanut butter and he stuck it under the table, and it stuck to the bottom of the table. And then when the father was banging on the table, it knocked the whole thing down. And now they had a piece of bread on their floor in the middle of Pesach. So that's why it is important to, especially again, the rooms where you're going to have food, to be extra careful to really check it as well as you could. And again, children are very, very creative, very talented at hiding chametz, and therefore we have to be one step ahead and one step smarter than our children.
Rabbi, you mentioned two levels of protection for the table.
Right.
Why wouldn't one be okay? You put a plastic over it, and then you put a tablecloth on top.
So yeah, technically, well, if you're going to put a tablecloth on top, then that's okay, because then you have two coverings. The reason why we suggest, but if you want to eat directly on the table, so then if it's appropriate to use two other coverings. The reason why we suggest two is in case one rips, so you still have the second one. But you're right, if you're not going to eat, if you're going to anyways put on another tablecloth every time you eat, so then you do have two coverings: the covering of the actual table and then your tablecloth. Yeah, so that would definitely be okay. Okay. Now let's move on to the most complicated area of the house when we're cleaning for Pesach. So again, so far I hope I've made things simple and clear. Again, we don't need to stress out. During COVID, we have enough stress in our life as it is. So therefore, again, very simple. The rest of the house, besides the eating areas, just do a basic cleaning. Look through all the drawers, all through the cabinets, make sure there's no big pieces of chametz. When it comes to the dining room, we have to be a little more meticulous, really, to wipe everything down, make sure everything's clean, no food residue. You also shouldn't bring anything that you brought to the table, the rest of the year, you shouldn't bring to the table on Pesach. So, for example, if you have a bencher that you use to say Birkat Hamazon during the year, well, that can get some food residue. Don't bring that to the table on Pesach. If you have a book, which you tend to read, unless you're going to go through it and make sure there's no crumbs and clean it. If you have a book, a lot of people have let's say at their Friday night dinner, they have a Torah book that they read from. If you have that, again, if you're going to want to bring that book to the table for Pesach, make sure to check that book very well to make sure there's not even any crumbs on it. Okay, and then we said the table itself, just to cover it, either with a tablecloth and one covering or double cover it, and then you are covered for that, no pun intended. Okay, what about the kitchen? The kitchen is probably the area which seems to be the most stressful, but even that, we will try to make that as simple and as easy as possible to understand what we need to do there. Okay, so the first thing you need to do when you're koshering your kitchen, when you're cleaning your kitchen for Pesach, the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that it's very, very clean. And again, here, because we're actually dealing with food, you need to make sure that it's not just the basic cleaning that we do. It should really be somewhat of a deeper clean that we need to do. Meaning the counters, you want to make sure they're super, super clean. The fridge, the freezer, anywhere where you could actually be putting Pesach food. So that needs to be completely clean. The custom is also, even though again, once it's for any area in the kitchen, where in the kitchen also it'll really be two areas. There's the areas which get hot, which would be the oven, the stove, things like that. And then there's the areas which are cold, which would be the counters, which would be the refrigerator. We'll discuss the sink in a moment because the sink also gets hot. So when it comes to the cold areas in your kitchen, which would be again the countertops, if you want to use the cabinets that you use for chametz, you want to empty those out and use them for Pesach, and the refrigerator. So those areas, because there's no heat involved, so therefore there all you need to do is just make sure it's super super clean. There's absolutely no food residue, and then the custom is to cover it as well. Okay, so in the kitchen, sometimes they sell these. In the fridge, excuse me, sometimes they sell these fridge liners, which a person could use, or really you could even just take a paper towel, put it down in the fridge, and put your food on top of that. It's not 100% necessary because once there's no chametz in there, there's no chametz in there. But that is the general custom. The general custom is to clean out the fridge very well, clean out the freezer very well, and to cover any areas which you're going to use for Pesach. By the way, if a person has, let's say, leftover food that's not kosher for Pesach, which he wants to leave in his fridge, it's okay to do that, but that area should be covered off. So let's say you want to take all your chametz food, you're gonna sell it to the non-Jew. You're going to keep it. You're going to keep it there, but you're going to sell it for the non-Jew. You should put that in a separate area of the fridge and seal it off. So, for example, if you wanted to use, let's say, the fruit and vegetable bin, you're going to put all your chametz in there, tape it shut, and then you can leave that. You can leave that alone, and then you use the rest of the fridge for Pesach. Or if you want to put it, let's say, in a bag, close it very tightly, mark it that it's chametz, and then you can leave it in your fridge. And then the rest, again, as long as it's clean, and if you want to put something down, that's even better. And then that is good to go. But again, it shouldn't just be like a superficial cleaning. It should really be very, very clean. You should really make sure you have no food residue at all. If that food residue would be some type of chametz, and then your Pesach food touches it, so that could be problematic. In general, if you're going to want to leave your chametz food in your kitchen, and you're going to sell it to a non-Jew, all of those areas should be taped off in some way. So, for example, you have your cabinet; it's filled with your cookies and your snacks, which you didn't finish for Pesach, and you're going to sell that cabinet to the non-Jew. So, even though technically it's okay now because it's the non-Jews and therefore it's not yours anymore, but you should go one step farther and actually tape it shut. And the reason for that is because if you don't, because you're in your kitchen the entire year, right? Let's say, for example, you need a fork. So the other 51 weeks of the year, when you need a fork, you go to that drawer where the forks are and you grab one out. And therefore, on Pesach also, when you need a fork, the human tendency is to go to that cabinet and grab a fork out and use it. So therefore, to prevent ourselves from doing that, therefore, a person should either put some kind of sign or just take a simple piece of tape and cover it. It doesn't have to be that it's taped so tight that you can't open it, but even just enough that if you reach the cabinet, you grab it open, you hear the tape ripping off, you remember, oh, I'm not supposed to be using this cabinet on Pesach. Every year, at least once or twice or 10 times over Pesach, right? I'll go to grab something, I'll open the drawer, I'll hear the tape ripping, and I'm like, oh, okay. Have to remember not to use that cabinet. And this is part of the system that our sages put in place, that things should actually be covered and somewhat closed, because they understood human nature. Human nature is that when you're used to doing something the entire year, so you're going to continue to do it on Pesach, and therefore we have to, in all the areas of our house, we have any place where there's a chance to make a mistake. I might use a chametz dish or a chametz or take chametz food. We want to not just have it in a closed cabinet, but actually seal it off in some way to put an extra reminder for ourselves that this is an area which we should not be using on Pesach. The counters as well like we said, should be very clean, and there also they should be covered as well. especially because the counters are an area where a lot of times people place food directly on their counters. You're cutting something on the counter, you're placing food on the counter, you have ingredients on the counter, and therefore the counters also, especially, it's important to clean very well and then cover. And you could cover it with anything that you want. Some people will buy, sheets of plastic or wood or something to cut that are they got cut to the size of their counters, which they could put on their counters. Um, for those of us who rent our houses and don't really want to invest in something permanent, so you can cover it with something like heavy duty tinfoil, or contact paper is also a very popular thing to cover the counter with. It just sticks on your counter, and then it stays on there, and then you pull it off after Pesach. Just here's a special tip that I'll give you. This is not a halacha. This is not a law. This is just some practical advice. If you get high quality contact paper, when you stick it to the counters, it's very hard to get off, and therefore you end up with glue residue. So I think it's actually preferable. So again, not halachically preferable. This is not a requirement in Jewish law, but just a practical tip. If you get cheaper contact paper, if you go to, let's say, Dollar Tree, and you get the cheaper contact paper from Dollar Tree, it doesn't stick as well, and therefore it'll stay on for the entire Pesach, in my experience. But then after Pesach, when you go to take it off, it'll come right off, and you won't have any problems. Okay, so there we have we have the fridge, the freezer, the cabinets we discussed, and the counters. All those, again, should just be cleaned and covered. There are certain types of counters which you can actually kosher, which you can actually purge. If you have a granite counter, then you can actually purge it. I know a lot of people who, when they redo their kitchen specifically for this reason, get granite counters, because this way they don't have to cover their counters on Pesach. They could just kosher it. I will tell you, it's not a simple process. You basically have to take boiling hot water and pour it over every inch of the counter. And as you can imagine, it gets very messy. So a lot of people that I know end up getting those counters, and then after a couple of years decide, I don't want to get my whole counters full of water. I don't want to make this big mess koshering it. It's much simpler just to cover it. And then I don't have to deal with it anymore. So again, there are certain types of counters where you could kosher it, where you could actually make it kosher, and then by boiling hot water over every inch of it. It's right. You can't just you actually have to. There has to be you have to take, let's say, like something like a tea kettle, and you'd have to pour hot water. It would have to actually be direct stream on every inch. You'd have to go up and down the entire counter, and that's why most people, in my experience, end up covering it. A number of years ago, my parents redid their kitchen, and they got granite countertops. And I said to my mother, I said, you're saying you're going to kosher it every year, but just wait. But in a couple of years, you're going to kosher it. But us Rudins are very stubborn, and actually, it's been a number of years, and she still koshers it every year instead of covering it. But again, it's 100% okay. To me, it makes more logical sense. Again, this is not halacha; it's just a personal preference to cover it instead of koshering it. But either approach is definitely okay. Both okay.
Can you use a steam iron to kosher the granite?
Yeah, so you could
run
use
the iron over it, and you just press on the steam.
Yeah, you could do that as well. So some opinions don't like it, but yeah, the general approach is to allow that. But again, you have to make sure that the steam is hitting directly on each part of the counter. You want the steam has to be still hot when it hits the counter, and therefore, if you're holding the steam iron a little too far away, or you're pointing it a little too far forward, the steam cools down very quickly. So therefore, you just want to make sure that if you're doing it, that you do a good and meticulous job. Again, there are ways to do it, either with the boiling hot water, yes, or with the steam iron. That's appropriate as well. But again, each person has to figure out what works better for them, what makes sense for them. Usually, it's the women of the house who decide this. Doesn't have to be. So they'll tell us what they think is okay, and then we can follow that. Although I don't know, some women could give it to the men to decide, and then they'll take full responsibility. So uh, any method you want is okay. These are all acceptable methods. Okay. Now we come to the three harder parts of the kitchen, and that's the sink, and the oven, and the stove. Okay, the sink, the oven, and the stove. Now, there's basically two types of sinks. There's a ceramic sink, and then there's a metal sink. So if you have a metal sink, then the metal sink, it's possible to kosher. You can purge that, you can make that kosher. And the way you would do that is by taking boiling hot water. You have to heat up water till it's, first of all, you have to make sure you haven't, you completely clean your sink, make sure it's completely clean. And you leave it for 24 hours. You don't use your kitchen sink for 24 hours. So it's clean. It has been used in 24 hours. And then the same thing would be for the counters, by the way. If you want to kosher the counters, also you shouldn't use them for 24 hours. And then again, you take the boiling hot water and you pour it over every inch of the sink. If the sink grates should be koshered. The sink, I'm sorry, the drain, those the removable drain catchers, those should be replaced for Pesach. And also, if you could replace the little tab, that should be replaced as well. Not that expensive. You could buy new ones for Pesach, and then your your sink would be kosher for Pesach. The other way to do it, you have to make sure you know what you're doing when you do this. But you could also actually take a blowtorch. They sell these mini blowtorches, and with the metal sink, you can take the blowtorch and heat up every. Again, you want to make sure that every part of the sink gets hot. You can do that as well, unless you know what you're doing. Unless you've done it before, you've seen someone do it before. I don't necessarily recommend it, but that is another approach how to do it. Okay. If you have a porcelain sink, if you don't have a metal sink, then that can't be koshered, and therefore the only thing to do is to cover it. Now, how do you cover your sink? It's not so easy. So either they actually sell these things called sink inserts. I believe they're made just for Pesach. I don't know any other reason for that. And basically, it's kind of like a plastic bin. It's made to fit into your sink. It has a little hole in the bottom for the drain. And then you just place that directly in your sink. And it's basically like a false bottom for your sink. It's basically like a false sink that you place into your sink. Now all the areas of your sink that you normally use are completely covered. That's not a problem. If you don't have that, so then what you could do is you can cover it either with contact paper or with heavy duty tinfoil. It's a little harder because those tend to not hold up as well in the water, but you can use that. And especially if the bottom of the sink is not going to be completely covered, it's going to be hard to completely cover the bottom of the sink. So then you can get one of those sink racks, which some people have in their sinks anyways, that you place down, and therefore anything you place down into the sink won't be touching the bottom of the sink. It'll be raised up a little bit, and then that would be the other way to do it. So again, a metal sink you could kosher or cover. If it's a non-metal sink, then you have to cover it. And the methods of covering it would either be the sink insert, or to cover it with some kind of material like heavy-duty tinfoil, heavy-duty aluminum foil, or contact paper, or anything else that you can be creative and come up with. And then that's what you would do with your sink. The sink, again, we need to be more careful about, because since your sink has hot water, the general rule is that anytime there's heat involved, so when you're dealing with something cold, as long as it's clean, then even if it was previously had chametz, well, the chametz is gone. Anything that has heat, so it's one of the biggest concepts in the laws of kosher, or one of the bigger concepts, is that we assume that anytime, let's say you have a pot and you cook something in that pot, so even if you completely clean the pot, there's still some taste of the food that you cooked actually in the metal. There's actually scientists known as metallurgists, and they study this, and they've discovered that as well, that the taste of the food that you cook could actually go into that. Fancy chefs also are very particular about what their knives were used to cut and what their pots were used to cook, because the taste of the food, what if if there's heat involved, so then the taste of the chametz could have gone into the sink or into the oven or the stove, as we'll discuss. And then once, if you use it again on Pesach, now that chametz taste, the taste of the chametz product which you use to cook on during the rest of the year, will actually come out and go into your Pesach food, and therefore again, that's why we need to completely cover it. Okay, and the final area of the kitchen is the oven and the stove. And there we want to be the most careful, because there's the most heat involved. There we're actually using that. So how do we kosher an oven or a stove for Pesach? So if you're lucky enough to have a self-clean oven, so then all you need to do is make sure it's somewhat clean. You want to make sure there's not a lot of residue. And then you want to just run the self-clean cycle. The self-clean cycle actually koshers your oven. The door you want to clean, because the door, when you self-clean the oven, it doesn't necessarily self-clean the door. So you want to make sure the inside of the door is clean. Then you just run the self-clean, and then your oven is kosher for Pesach. That's very simple and easy. If you don't have a self-clean oven, so then the oven does not get as hot, and therefore and as clean. Therefore, what you do is you take an oven cleaner like Easy Off or something like that. You use that to completely clean the oven, and then you turn it on the highest that it goes for 2 hours, and then it's kosher. So again, you clean it with Easy Off or an oven cleaner. Make sure it's completely clean. Run it on the highest for 2 hours, and now your oven is kosher for Pesach. Also, again, once we break it down to all the different things, that is not so hard. That is pretty easy, and we can take care of that as well. And the last thing to take care of in the kitchen is the stove. Okay, the stove might be the most complicated part of the kitchen. And with the stove also, again, anything you're koshering, you want to leave for 24 hours. So the oven also, before you kosher it, you want to make sure that you left it for 24 hours. The stove also, you want to leave it for 24 hours before you kosher it. So how do you clean the stove? So it depends what kind of stove you have. There's 3 types of stoves, and depending on which kind you have, that's how you'll kosher it. Oh, by the way, just one point that I missed to go back to. When I said to run the self-clean cycle, there's actually a new type of self-clean oven. It used to be that all the self-clean ovens, the way they clean is they just turn on the oven super, super hot, and it basically burns away all the dirt which is in the oven. You have to make sure your oven's not too dirty, because if it is, it can actually start a fire. You also don't want to do this on Erev Pesach, right before Pesach, because self-clean cycles are notorious for breaking ovens. So therefore, you do want to give yourself a little leeway, just in case something happens to your oven, that you'll be able to take care of it before Pesach. Okay, but if you have there's a new type of self-clean oven which actually doesn't clean with super high heat. It's a different way. It's a much lower heat, so that actually wouldn't kosher it, and therefore you'd have to use the other method of just leaving it on the highest for about 2 hours. Okay, now we come to the stove. How do you clean the stove? So again, before we kosher it, we want to make sure it's completely clean, and you want to leave it for 24 hours. Okay. Then if you have a gas stove, so what you want to do is you want to take the grates off, and the easiest way to kosher the grates is actually when you kosher your oven, you just stick the grates in the oven. So if you're self-cleaning them, you stick them in the oven when you're self-cleaning it. They might get a little discolored, but nothing will happen to them. And then the grates are the grates are kosher. This is on a gas, if you have a gas stove. And then the rest of the stove, you just want to cover. Use a heavy duty foil or something like that. You cover the rest of the stove. The grates go in the oven, and then that's kosher. If you have the an electric stove which has the coils, not a glass top, I'll get to a glass top in a second, but with the ones where they have the coils where you put the food directly on the coil. So there also you just want to cover all the surfaces, including the drip trays. I've found when I had an oven that had a drip tray, when that type of oven, I found it easier just to replace the drip trays than to try to cover them. You can go to Walmart; they're like $15 for a new set of the drip trays, which go underneath the coils. That's what I found the easiest to do. And then so either you place the drip trays or cover them, cover the entire oven, and then you turn on the stove. Once it gets red hot means kosher. And therefore, as long as they get red hot, which takes 30 seconds, then it's kosher. The most difficult type of stove to kosher is a glass top stove. And the reason for that is because it's actually there's two problems with that. One problem is that they're very hard to clean. Although I'm going to give you $1 million trick in just a moment how to clean a glass top stove. This is not only for Pesach, this is for the entire year. Glass top stoves are very, very hard to clean. To get really clean, when you clean them, there's usually still a ring of like grease or burnt food around the coils. Very, very hard to clean. And the other thing is that it's not recommended to cover it, because if you cover it, the glass can actually crack. Also the glass doesn't necessarily get as hot as everything else. So therefore, this is what you do when it comes to a glass top stove. So again, the first thing you want to clean it very well. Now, for years, I tried to find out how to clean them. If you go online and you search for how to clean it, they sell these cleaners. They use baking soda, lemon juice, all types of mixtures. Nothing works. The only thing which I found somewhat effective to actually get off that thick layer of burnt food is if you use a razor blade. It's very hard to do. You're very likely to scratch your stove. Therefore do not recommend that. This is the $1 million trick that I learned. It's the easiest trick. If you have a glass top stove, this is what we do all the time. Every time we want to clean our stove, not only on Pesach, what you do is you just take a regular all-purpose cleaner, you spray the stove, and then instead of using a sponge or something, or a rag or something like that, if you use a harder sponge, it's going to scratch it. You use a pumice stone. You know that thing that you use to clean your feet? Sounds strange, but I'm telling you this works. Take a pumice stone and you use it like a sponge. It will not scratch the stove. It will get your glass top completely clean. That is the best way to do it. That is what I recommend. Again, if you have a glass top stove, regular all-purpose spray, you take a pumice stone. You might have to scrub a little bit, but everything comes right off and you'll get it perfectly clean. After that, you want to get the stove as hot as possible. So turn on all 4 burners at the same time. If you have little kids around, make sure they're not around when you do this. It gets very hot. Turn all 4 burners on for 10 minutes. And that's basically as hot as you're going to get it. Because the glass top, because it's only the burners that get hot and the areas around it don't get hot. And usually when you put a pot on the stove, it does go over the edge of the burners, which is why people like glass top stoves. You can slide things on and off. It's very convenient. However, for Pesach, it does present a problem. So therefore, what's recommended when you have a glass top stove, even after you turn it on for 10 minutes, is not to put things directly on the glass top. So what do? 2 solutions. Either you can buy, there's a certain type of washer that you can buy. It looks like a regular washer, except it's much bigger. It's about 5-6 inches. For a long time, I couldn't find it. I think I actually just found it. If anyone needs, you can contact me. I'd be happy to buy one for you. And it's about 1/8 of an inch thick or 1/4 of an inch thick. It's about that big. you put these metal washers on each of your things, and therefore when you put the pot on, it's not actually touching the stove. It's on these washers, and it doesn't really affect the cooking. And therefore, again, you've gotten your stove as hot as possible, and now you're not putting anything directly on. There's another product also which I just came across, which is made. It's not a Jewish product, but there's someone out there who made this product. It's called a Lomi, Lomi. If you Google Lomi glass top stove, you'll come across this product. I've never used it before, so I don't know how well it works. But from the videos that I've ordered one, I'm hopefully going to get it soon, and I can let you know. But basically, it's a cloth type of material. It's obviously not made out of cloth. I think it's made of some type of silicone, and it's made because glass top stoves are notorious hard to clean. It's made to put on your glass top stove. So therefore, when you're cooking, even if you spill, you don't get the actual stove top dirty. It's made just to be this surface which you place on top of right on top of the stove. It doesn't burn. And then when you're done with it, you just throw it in the dishwasher or the washing machine, and you can clean it that way. And then also you're covering your stove, but in a way where it won't negatively affect the stove. Some people try to cover with tin foil. First of all, the tin foil gets very hot. It burns. It sticks to the stove. Also, if it gets too hot, it can it can crack the glass. Therefore, I don't suggest that. Again, what I suggest is either to buy these big metal washers or to buy this product. Hopefully, it'll work well. Again, I can't vouch for it because I've never used it, but halachically, this would be something that is acceptable. And then that's what you do with the glass top stove. The other two areas of the kitchen which a person might come across on Pesach is a microwave or a dishwasher. Without getting into all the details now, but those I don't suggest koshering for Pesach. I would suggest not using those for Pesach, not using your dishwasher or using your microwave for Pesach. That's definitely the simplest thing to do. You go without that for a week. If a person really needs to kosher their microwave or their dishwasher, there are some ways to do it. You can contact me and I'll let you know. I just see one question in the chat. If one accidentally breaks one of these laws, does Tumah get included? Not sure what the question is exactly. Tumah is usually spiritual impurity. So, if you accidentally break one of the laws, then I advise you to contact your local rabbi. Sometimes, first of all, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to, accidents happen every year. Things happen. Anything that you're going to do, trust me, has been done 100 times before. So definitely don't feel bad. If it's a question of what you should do with the food, what you should do with, if you didn't kosher something correctly, each situation is a little different. So therefore, I suggest you reach out to your local rabbi and he'll be able to tell you exactly what to do. All right.
Thank you very much.
The hour is late. Unless anyone has any questions, we will conclude here for the night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. Good to see everyone and someone in person. And everyone should have a good night.
Good night.
Good night. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.